Because, you know, investors are out there looking at the policies of this country that govern the oil and gas sector, and they have been delaying their investment because they want to know where is the direction. Because you're about to review your policies. We don't know what are the tax regimes. We don't know what are the royalties, what are the expectations. So the law is the document that decides all this. So investor will not want to invest in a situation of uncertainty. They will halt their investment, and if we are delaying it longer, this investor will not keep holding their money like that. They will go to another country and invest their money. And in oil and gas, you know, when people invest their money, it's capital intensive venture, and it's irreversible. You cannot say, oh, Nigeria has reviewed and finalized their policy. Okay, let's remove our money from this country and go back to Nigeria. Once you invest your money in this country, you cannot take it out. You have to be there. So they may not have other money or resources to also come back to the country. So I hope that investors will now be settled and they'll be okay. They'll look at this policy. If they're happy with it, they will now invest. Even though it's not yet a law, there's still room for a lot of reviews, because the president might also send it back. So I think the earlier the National Assembly finalize this bill, the better. I think the allocation of 3% of cost oil for the host communities, I think is one of the heated issues coming out from the bill recently. So initially, I think not even 3%, it was 5%. But what the Senate version passed recently was 3%. 3% of what? That's very important. People just start saying 3%. But 3% of what? 3% of the cost oil. That is operating costs. Or if you like, expenditures incurred in the process of oil and gas production activities in the preceding year. So we call it cost oil. That is the amount of money you spend in all activities in this particular host community in the last year. So, and you know, when you look at oil and gas operation, they are very capital intensive, like I mentioned. So it involves a lot of money. And 3% of whatever is spent last year or the previous year is really big. You might think 3 is small, but it's against a big number. 3% of 10 million, you know, is bigger than 10% of 10 naira, right? So you don't just look at the fraction and say, okay, this is too small for this locality. For people that don't support it, they think these host communities, they've been given so many things, so many interventions and allocations for host communities. Even the Senate president was arguing that these host communities are given what they call the gas emission taxes. There are some taxes that are collected is given to those host communities for polluting the environment, and that's an allocation to them. You talk about the 13% derivation funds, which is given from the federation account. That's 13% of whatever entered into the federal account is now sent back to the state, so they can build these host communities for what they have lost to compensate their losses. That's another allocation. You talk about corporate social responsibilities that is imposed on these international oil companies operating in this. They will be asked to build hospitals, schools, roads, and apart from so many interventions like Niger Delta Development Commission, they are also given some budgets to do some project in these areas. There is a whole ministry of Niger Delta to build the entire, to look at the development of the entire area. And I think there is normal federal allocation that every state gets. So I think there are lots more. Now we are adding this. Now 3% of the cost oil for the host communities. And now the question is, it's not about adding to this list of allocations. It's about the management. How well are these funds managed? All these things I mentioned, are they managed well? Have they translated into development of these areas, or they even contributed to more corruption? I think the people, the whole country, we should be challenging the leaders in this area. what are they doing with this money? Because most of this agitation and complaints from people in that area is because they have not seen all this money translated into development and improvement in the environment. I know it has led to degradation of the environment and pollution of the water. It affected their economic life, social life, and their well-being. So they need to be compensated for all this pollution, even though some of the oil and gas activities are now going toward the sea, not on the onshore. And that will reduce how much the effect of oil and gas affect the socio-economic well-being of the people. So I think people should not be worried about what gets what. If there is good governance, if there is a prudent management of these resources, and then it all comes down to who is going to manage these funds. They call it host community trust fund, and then who is to be in charge of that, and which community, to what extent this community need to be compensated. So it comes down to the management. So we need to raise these kind of issues, because having the bill is one thing, but implementing it is another. We have so many brilliant policies and laws in the country where when it comes to implementation, you don't see the results. You know, when you are adding this kind of money that you're going to give to the host communities, is going to add to the cost of producing the oil. And while the oil has a uniform market, you sell your oil at a parallel price that is equivalent or similar across in the market. And now in Nigeria, we are saying that the cost of production is going to be higher, and you are sending away your investors, because the cost of paying this 3% of whatever you spend for the host community is going to add to the cost of your production. And if you don't find this kind of additional costs elsewhere, you'd rather go there and invest your money. You already have insecurity around this area, and these oil operators, they spend so much extra money to provide the security, and now you're asking them to pay for these host communities. Even though paying for these host communities will relieve them of spending for the security, where we suppose, because we think that if these host communities are well taken care of, there will not be so much security concerns, but we are not certain. That we can only assume. But the idea is paying 3% extra of your operating costs is going to add to the cost of production, and is going to affect their profitability entirely. So it's going to send away some investors from the country or from onshore production. So productions will be largely on the sea. So the NPC Limited, as proposed, is going to behave like an independent or private company on behalf of government. Well, the regulatory role is going to be done by the Upstream Regulatory Commission and the Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Commissions. There are a lot of subsidiaries on NPC that are going to collapse into these two regulatory commissions that will be doing all these roles. And that they will be the referees and the managers of the entire sector. But in terms of the playing the role of the business and doing the oil and gas activities, so that the government itself will get the benefit, dividends from the operation of the oil and gas activities, the NNPC Limited will act like an independent oil company. Initially the government will give money to this NNPC Limited to manage itself, and then start investing in other activities. It can invest in any kind of portfolio and then engage in oil and gas activities, exploration, development and production, and then whatever money it gets as profits, it sends it back to the government. So it's like government bailing out the NNPC for the first time. So no more intervention, no more money. What if you manage your money well, is for you. If you don't mismanage it, if you manage it well, it's for your own good. If you don't, it's all for you. So the government is no longer going to take any responsibility of whatever an NPC might be doing, efficiently or otherwise. But eventually, the NPC Limited will be obligated or has the right to now open its shares for public subscription. So what we're going to see in the future is private individuals will be buying shares of NNPC. So more or less, you're likely privatizing the NNPC, and that's what's going to be happening there. Initially, the government will own the 100% shares of the NNPC, but later on, it will not have the capacity to keep managing itself, Inefficiencies, mismanagement is likely to continue because it's still government thing. But when you involve private participation, you're likely to improve the management and efficiency of the NPC. So eventually, me and you will be buying shares in NPC.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sure, we can wait too.
It will not change the role. It's only the title. It's just the name. But perhaps the individuals, the staff, the operation will be the same. It's only the title that will change. Though, like PPRA, like PEF, they'll also be part of the same regulatory commission. So they're going to fall under the downstream regulatory commission. There are also upstream regulatory commissions that will be responsible for managing the upstream and exploration of the oil and gas reserves in the country. And another thing that's very important that has been discussed in the bill is the issue of 30% profit oil for oil exploration. Yeah, so the government still wants to invest so much more in exploration of new reserves. And the idea is, instead of having oil and gas reserves only in few regions, or in a region, if you like, Niger Delta, now how can we have these oil and gas reserves dispersed across the country, spread across the country, so that our oil reserve will not be only in Niger Delta. We can have oil reserves in the northwest, northeast, across. But the wisdom is that so that we can tap more from our available and probable reserves before the oil and gas tenure finishes. Because we can still count up to 3 decades for oil and gas. That's the worst scenario. So people are thinking that oil and gas will be displaced and new energy sources will come and take over. But still we have so much advantage from the fossil fuels, especially oil and gas, that we can really tap and get the benefit from it before its tenure finishes. But the people are thinking that why should we sacrifice our profits? Whatever profit we get, 30% of that, we now go and put it in a risky investment to explore for oil. Right now there is oil and gas exploration in Bauchi. We are not certain if they found oil there or not, and in what quantity. Is it in commercial quantity? And so many billions we have spent to explore for oil. And there is always probability of you finding what we call the dry hole. Dry hole is you drilling, spending all this money, but there is no oil. You only find water. You spend all your billions for nothing. And these are taxpayers' money. And this is a time when we need to diversify our economy. And we need to tax the oil and gas sector to build other sectors of the economy. But we are now getting the money from the oil, and we are now reinvesting the same money back to the same sector. So we are just still trapped into the same sector, and that's the resource cost we're talking about. So I think, for me, I think personally, I wouldn't have voted for 30% profit oil for oil and gas exploration, because the risks is transferable. We can transfer these risks to international oil companies in a petroleum sharing contract. In this kind of contract, the oil and gas companies will take the full responsibility of any risk at the exploration stage. But they will be compensated if eventually oil is found. The government should not have necessarily taken this kind of risk at the moment when we need so much resources to fix our issues and build sectors of the economy. And people are thinking that no, the northern part of the country should not have oil. We should be the only people that should have the oil reserves. Like I had a radio conversation around this. Some people are calling, no, this shouldn't happen. But the idea is, even if oil is found anywhere in Nigeria, the resources, the proceeds, the profit is shared according to the national distribution formula. It's not like maybe perhaps some advantage of host communities like we talk about, but the proceeds from whatever new reserves we found is going to belong to the government, central government, because all natural resources, even if it is in your backyard, it belongs to the central government. It's going to federal government. So it doesn't matter where this oil is found. But people are thinking that maybe instead of investing in oil and gas, let's invest in renewable energy. So all these are the discussions. But for me, well, even though people are still thinking that 30% is big, like I mentioned, but 30% of the profit oil is still insignificant, because sometimes you see oil and gas operation, but there is no profit. It's not always that you make profit. It's not every day that you make profit. So even if you say 30% of the profit, what if there is no profit? Then there is no 30%.
Okay.
So exploration, we have a lot of potential reserves in the country, We have one in Chad basins. We have one in Ebonyi. We have another one in Sokoto. We have another one in Ogun, in Bida, in Benue. So these are probable reserves. So let's quickly tap into them according to people that support this. Let's quickly tap into them, into these probable reserves, get the best out of them, and then get the benefit, and then move on. The importation is a different segment from the upstream. The upstream is your license to build the rig for production, be it in the onshore or offshore, and that's upstream activity. But for the importation of refined petroleum, that's the job of the downstream sector. So I don't see any link there, and the NNPC has its own marketers that are doing this kind of importation on its behalf. But other companies that are doing production, they don't care about whether you have sufficient supply of refined petroleum or not. But one thing that I will say is that the PIB is trying to encourage local or domestic or Nigerians participation. Nigerian participation in the production. Okay. Now, there are more Nigerians that have the oil and gas reserves than the foreigners. But the foreigners produce more than Nigerians. That is to say, more than 50% of oil and gas reserves belongs to Nigerians. And the less than 50% that belongs to the international oil companies produce more than 90% of our oil. So if you remove all the Nigerian companies, including the NNPC's production contribution, we're not going to lose much of our daily production. And we likely lose maybe 10% of that. But 90% of our daily oil production is produced by international oil companies. And so now how can we bridge the gap? Now, if these people say are pulling out of the country, so that means we're going to lose 90% of our daily production. And what's going to happen to our budget? What's going to happen to me and you? So in order to encourage local participation, local content, you mentioned, the bill reduced what they call the royalty for the domestic participation, especially onshore, because most of the onshores, they belong to the Nigerian companies on concession. Also, what they do is they give you the license to operate as a lease, as a domestic or Nigerian company to operate, and whatever oil you get from there belongs to you. But you have to pay more than 80% tax of your profit. Do you follow?
I understand.
So like, okay, this is your oil. That's why they say I have oil well. Maybe if you become president, you give me oil well, right? So if you give me oil well, it means that this is my oil well. I will produce it and then sell the oil and get my money. But I'm going to give you as a government, I'm going to give you more than 80% of the profit. So I only get 20% of the profit. So now, in order to encourage local participation, they reduce the royalties. Royalties is a natural tax you pay for using the natural resources in the country. So they reduces to between 5 and 7.5%.
Thank you so much for your time with us, Dr. Ahmed Adam. It's always a wonderful time having this conversation with you.
Thank you so much.